The fist came down on the nurse's station like a gunshot. Every head in the emergency room turned. A man in uniform, badge gleaming, jaw tight, eyes scanning the room like he owned it, pointed his finger directly at her face. You let my guy sit in that hallway for 40 minutes. You want to explain that to me?" She didn't blink. Her scrub sleeve was already torn where he'd grabbed her. The fabric hung off her shoulder. Around her, 15 people watched and said nothing. He thought he'd broken her. He had no idea what she was. If this story pulls you in, stay with me until the very end. Hit follow so you don't miss a single moment. Drop a like and leave me a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The night Emily Varas transferred to North Vale Medical Center, it was raining so hard she could barely see the entrance from the parking lot. She sat in her car for a moment longer than necessary. Not because she was nervous exactly, but because she'd learned over the years that transitions deserved a breath. You didn't walk out of one life and into another without pausing at the threshold. Her old unit sergeant used to say that. Take the breath, Varas. Then move. She took the breath. Then she grabbed her bag, pulled her hood up, and ran for the door. North Vale was a Level 2 trauma center sitting at the edge of Harwick County, a mid-sized city in that particular American geography where industry had slowly collapsed and left behind a population that was tired, underfunded, and grateful for whatever health care they could get. The ER ran hard most nights. Understaffed, overlit, smelling permanently of antiseptic and old coffee. It was in almost every way the opposite of the controlled chaos Emily had spent 7 years navigating overseas, but that was partly why she'd chosen it. She needed something that felt real without being what it used to be. The charge nurse on duty that first night was a woman named Donna Reyes, late 40s, short silver hair, the kind of calm efficiency that only came from having seen too much for too long. She handed Emily a badge lanyard without looking up from her clipboard. "You're Emily Varas. Transfer from St. Augustine's?" "Yes." "Before that?" "A beat." "Military." Donna looked up then, just briefly, doing the quiet calculation that most people did, trying to figure out what branch, what that meant, why someone with that background was here now in a county hospital on a Tuesday night in the rain. She didn't ask. Emily respected that. "You're on with Dr. Hale's team. Trauma Bay 2 is your home. Learn the rhythms fast. We don't have time to slow down for anybody." She paused, then added almost reluctantly, "You'll be fine. You look like someone who figures things out." "I try," Emily said. "Don't try. Do it." Donna went back to her clipboard. "Welcome to North Vale." The first few weeks were manageable. The work itself wasn't the challenge. Emily had triaged casualties in field conditions with equipment held together by prayer and improvisation, so a well-stocked Level 2 trauma bay felt practically luxurious. She was good at the job. Quietly good. The kind of good that didn't announce itself. That just meant things got done correctly and patients stabilized and the people working around her stopped having to double-check her work. She made no particular effort to impress anyone, and no particular effort to blend in either. She ate lunch alone sometimes, sat with the other nurses other times. She was neither warm nor cold. She was just present, competent, and professional, which in a short-staffed ER is essentially the highest form of social currency. Dr. Marcus Hale, the attending she was assigned to, told her at the end of her third week that she had the best situational awareness of any nurse he'd worked with in 12 years. He said it the way people say things they mean, but don't intend to be a compliment, just a neutral observation of fact. "Thanks," she said. "I'm not complimenting you," he said. "I'm noting it. There's a difference." "I know," she said. "That's why I said thanks instead of something else." He looked at her for a moment, and for the first time something like a smile crossed his face. It vanished immediately, but it had been there. She first saw Travis Kane on a Thursday night in her fourth week. He came through the ambulance bay entrance around 11 p.m., walking ahead of the paramedics like he'd personally summoned them. He was a big man. Not soft big, but hard big, the kind of size built from years of weight rooms and authority, with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched and eyes that moved constantly. cataloging everything in a room and deciding what he owned. He was an officer with the Harwick County Sheriff's Department. That part she didn't learn until later. In the moment, she just registered the uniform, the walk, the way everyone around him subtly adjusted their posture, staff included. Behind him, 2 paramedics were rolling in a gurney. The man on it was handcuffed to the railing, eyes half open, skin ashy. Possible overdose complicated by a head laceration he'd apparently gotten during the arrest. The chart said fell during takedown, which Emily had learned to translate fluently. She was moving toward the gurney before Kane had finished his entrance. "Who's triaging him?" she asked the paramedic. "Trauma Bay 2, the paramedic said. GCS is 8, BP dropping." "Okay." She turned to the second nurse on the floor, a young man named Obi. "Get Dr. Hale, now." "Hey," Kane's voice came from behind her. Not loud, just with a specific quality, the kind that expected to be heard. "Where's he going?" "Bay 2, Emily said without turning around. "You can wait in the family area or speak with the charge nurse." "I need to be with him." "You need to let us work." She was already moving. "Someone will update you." There was a pause, the kind of pause that has texture to it, that you feel on the back of your neck. And then Kane didn't follow. He stopped. She heard the shift of his boots on the floor, and then the silence where forward momentum had been. That was the first time. The second time came 11 days later, and it was different. Emily was in the middle of a shift change handoff when the double doors swung open and Kane walked in again. This time without a patient, without a reason she could see, scanning the floor until his eyes landed on her. He walked over. "The guy I brought in 2 weeks ago," he said. "The one your team spent 45 minutes on before doing anything real." She finished writing her note before looking up. "I remember the patient. He had to be transferred anyway, you know that? After all that time you people took, he ended up at County General." "He was stabilized here before transfer," Emily said. "That's standard protocol when—" "I'm not asking for a lecture on protocol." His voice had dropped, not quieter but denser. "I'm telling you that from where I stood, watching your team run around in circles while that man was on a table, it didn't look like anybody knew what they were doing." Donna was at the nurse's station 10 feet away. She had gone very still. Emily kept her voice even. "If you have a formal complaint about the care provided, the patient advocate office is on the second floor. They have forms." "I'm not filing a form." He leaned slightly forward. Not enough to be called threatening, just enough. "I'm telling you to your face. What I saw wasn't good enough." "Okay," Emily said. He waited for more. There wasn't more. She picked up her chart and walked toward Bay 3. She heard him say something under his breath as she turned away. She didn't catch all of it. She caught enough. The pattern established itself with the particular efficiency of patterns that have a determined architect. Kane came in 3, sometimes 4 times a week, often with legitimate reason, sometimes without any reason Emily could identify. He always found her, always had something, a complaint about wait times, a question about a discharge that had nothing to do with him, a comment about the way a procedure had been handled that was just technical enough to sound informed to anyone who didn't know better. Emily started keeping notes, not because she was planning anything, just because she'd been trained in another life to document what she observed. Dates, times, the nature of each interaction, who was present. She didn't tell anyone about the notes. She also didn't adjust her behavior. She answered his questions when they deserved answers and redirected him when they didn't. She stayed professional with the specific discipline of someone who understood that professionalism, when it holds under pressure, is its own kind of power. But there was a cost to it. That was the part she didn't talk about. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from hard work, but from sustained vigilance, from constantly monitoring your own reactions, constantly calculating how to exist in a space where someone has decided to make you a problem. Emily knew that exhaustion. She'd felt versions of it before, in different contexts, in different uniforms. It sat differently now, lower in the chest, quieter. But it was there. She ate dinner alone more often those weeks. The incident happened on a Wednesday. It was a heavy shift, 2 MVCs within an hour, a chest pain case that turned into a STEMI, a pediatric fever that kept spiking despite intervention. The ER was running at capacity, and everyone was moving fast, and the margins were thin in the way that made experienced staff quiet and focused, and anyone newer slightly scared. Kane came in around 7 p.m. with a DUI arrest. The man was combative, not dangerously, just the loud, sloppy aggression of someone who'd had his night interrupted by handcuffs. Kane delivered him to the triage desk, got confirmation of the bed assignment, and then instead of waiting by the desk, he followed the gurney back toward Bay 4. "Sir, you need to wait out front," the nurse at the desk told him. "I know the procedure," Kane said, and kept walking. Emily was coming out of Bay 2 when she saw it. Kane, inside the care area, standing near the gurney while the intake nurse tried to work around him. She walked over. "Officer." Her voice was steady. "You can't be back here during intake. Please return to the waiting area." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not to anger exactly, but to a kind of decision, like he'd been waiting for this particular moment and had already decided what to do with it. "I've been dealing with you for a month," he said, loudly enough that it carried. 3 nurses looked up. A resident paused mid-step. "Every time I bring someone in, you act like I'm the problem, like I'm in the way." His voice had the practiced resonance of someone who knew how to fill a room. "You want to know what I think? I think you don't have the temperament for this kind of work. I think you're in over your head and too proud to admit it, and I think your patients are paying the price." The ER had gone half quiet in that particular way that silence assembles itself around a scene. Emily didn't look away from him. She didn't raise her voice. "You need to move to the waiting area," she said. "Now." "Or what?" He stepped closer. Not close enough to be quantified, just close enough to make the air between them deliberate. And then his hand came up, not striking, but gripping, fingers closing around her upper arm with the specific pressure of someone demonstrating that they could. She felt the fabric pull, then the tear. She looked down at her sleeve, then back up at him. "Anger makes people careless, officer," she said quietly. She walked to the nurse's station, set down her chart, and picked up the phone to call Donna. The formal complaint she filed that evening was thorough and unemotional. Dates, times, the pattern of harassment, the physical contact. Donna co-signed it. 2 other nurses confirmed they'd witnessed the sleeve incident. The hospital's response came 4 days later. The administrator who delivered it was a man named Philip Greer. Mid-50s, careful eyes, the kind of institutional loyalty that had calcified over decades into something that looked like professionalism but was actually just self-preservation. He sat across from Emily in a small conference room with the complaint file in front of him and his hands folded on top of it. "We take these matters seriously," he began. "I know you do," Emily said. "Officer Kane has been a significant point of contact for this facility for a long time. His department accounts for a substantial number of our intake referrals." A pause. "That context is relevant." Emily looked at him. "Is it?" Greer cleared his throat. "We also received a counter-complaint from Officer Kane regarding your conduct during patient intake. Specifically, an accusation that your delays during a critical care window contributed to a poor outcome. That accusation is false. The patient was stabilized and transferred appropriately. The records are accurate," Emily said. "I keep excellent records." Another pause. Longer. "Ms. Varas, I want to be direct with you. The best outcome for everyone here might be a brief administrative leave, a cooling off period. It would allow—" "You're asking me to leave. I'm suggesting you're asking me to leave," she said again. Not loud, just precise. Greer opened his mouth, closed it, and then said something she would think about later in the way that certain sentences lodged themselves in the memory like splinters. Sometimes the path of least resistance is just easier for everyone. Emily was quiet for a moment. "I'll take the week," she said. "And when I come back, I expect Officer Kane's facility access to be reviewed. We'll take that under consideration." She stood, picked up her bag, and walked out. The week was not restful. She ran in the mornings 5 miles along the river trail behind her apartment, which was the kind of apartment that said temporary in all its details. Minimal furniture, boxes still unpacked in the second bedroom, a kitchen that had been used but not really lived in. She'd had apartments like this before, in the years when she'd been between things, when she'd been in the process of becoming whatever came next without yet knowing what that was. She also spent several hours of that week on the phone, calls she didn't explain to anyone, to numbers saved under initials in her contacts, short conversations that covered practical ground without wasted language. She made a few requests. She was told the requests would be noted. She didn't know exactly when things would move. She'd learned a long time ago that you couldn't schedule the moment when the situation changed. You could only be ready when it did. On the sixth night, she sat on her apartment floor with her back against the couch, and her notes spread out in front of her. Not reviewing them, just looking at them, taking the kind of inventory that happens in the body before it happens in the mind. She was tired in that specific way she recognized from other long stretches. Not defeated, but worn. There was a difference. She thought about what Kane had said, the part she'd heard under his breath as she walked away that first time. "You don't belong here." She picked up her notes, stacked them neatly, and put them away. He was wrong about that. He just didn't know it yet. She came back on Monday. No announcement, no performance. She walked into the locker room, changed into fresh scrubs, clipped her badge to her chest, and walked onto the floor. Obi was at the station when she came out. He looked up, looked back down, and then very deliberately looked back up again. "You're back," he said. "I'm back." He handed her a chart. "Bay 3's been a mess without you." She took the chart. "Then let's fix it." She worked the full shift. Dr. Hale said nothing about her absence, just nodded when she came into Bay 2 and handed her a set of gloves. Donna found a reason to walk by her station twice before lunch, each time saying nothing, each time with a small, tight expression that in Donna's vocabulary probably counted as a welcome back speech. Kane didn't appear that day, or the next. On Wednesday, she heard from Obi that Kane had filed an additional complaint, this one alleging she'd been negligent during his most recent intake, though the specific patient or date remained conveniently unspecified. She heard it the way you hear weather reports, as information about conditions, not as a verdict. She added it to her notes. She kept working. He came back on Thursday night. Different energy this time. Less performance. More intention. He walked in around 9 p.m., went directly to Philip Greer's office without stopping at the floor, and was in there for 20 minutes. When he came out, he walked to the nurse's station and asked, with a particular brand of official formality, to speak with Emily Varas. She came to the station. "I'm told you've been filing complaints," he said. "I filed a complaint," she said. "One. It was accurate." "You've been making this difficult for everyone here." His voice had shifted slightly. Less heat, more pressure. The kind of pressure that comes from someone who's used to having institutional weight behind them and has just confirmed it's still there. Dr. Hale's team, the administration, the staff you work with every day, everyone's caught in the middle of this. "Nobody's in the middle of anything," Emily said. "You grabbed me. That's documented. That's what this is about. My department has worked with this hospital for... I know how long your department has worked with this hospital." He looked at her. A long, still look, the kind that was doing something other than simply seeing, calculating maybe, or deciding. "You should think carefully about whether this is the right environment for you," he said finally. "I have thought about it," she said. "I'm staying." Something moved through his expression then. Not anger, not exactly. Something older than anger. The particular frustration of someone encountering a wall where they expected a door. He left without another word. Emily stood at the nurse's station for a moment after he was gone. Donna appeared at her elbow. "You okay?" "Yeah," Emily said. "He's going to push harder." "I know." A pause. Then Donna. "What are you going to do?" Emily picked up the chart she'd set down when Kane arrived, found her place, and continued writing. "I'm going to keep doing my job," she said. She didn't say the rest of it, the part she knew and Donna didn't, the quiet certainty that had been sitting in her chest all week, like something waiting to be opened, the calls she'd made, the requests that had been noted. She didn't say it because she didn't need to. Because 3 days later, on a Sunday evening when the last light was going orange over the parking lot and nobody was looking at the sky because the sirens had already started, the situation changed. It changed fast, and it changed loud, And when the black tactical vehicles pulled into the North Vale Medical Center lot with their lights cutting through the dusk, Travis Kane was standing 30 feet from Emily Varas, and every soldier who came through that door moved directly toward her. The first vehicle was a black Suburban with government plates and no markings. It pulled into the North Vale lot at 6:47 p.m. and stopped at an angle that blocked two of the ambulance bays, so not carelessly, but deliberately, the way vehicles park when the people inside them have already decided how the next hour is going to go. The second vehicle came right behind it, then a third. By the time the fourth cleared the entrance, people inside the ER were pressing toward the windows. Emily had been standing at the nurse's station, finishing a discharge note when the first siren cut through the evening air. Not a police siren, not an ambulance, but something flatter and more authoritative, the kind of tone that belonged to federal frequency bands. She'd heard it before. Her hand stilled on the chart. Kane was 10 feet away, near the intake desk, still in the middle of whatever point he'd been making to the floor supervisor. He'd turned toward the window, too. For a moment, they were just two people watching the same thing from across a room. Then the doors opened. They came in fast, but not running. 8 soldiers in full tactical gear, rifles secured but present, moving with the contained efficiency of people who had rehearsed this kind of entry in actual conditions rather than training scenarios. Behind them, a man in a different configuration of the same uniform, older, no rifle, but carrying command in his posture the way other men carried weight. He was scanning the room. His eyes found Emily. He crossed to her in 12 steps, stopped, and brought his hand up in a salute that was precise and unhurried and completely, devastatingly serious. "Lieutenant Varas." His voice was even, pitched for her, and not the room. "Commander Darren Oakes, 44th Medical Response Unit. We have a situation developing outside the perimeter. I need your assessment." The room had gone entirely silent. Emily set down her pen. "What kind of situation?" "Armed engagement approximately 400 meters northwest. 3 civilian casualties already in transit. Estimated 6 to 9 additional incoming. Local law enforcement is containing the outer perimeter, but the tactical picture is still fluid." A pause, measured and professional. "We requested a trauma coordinator with field experience. You were the name that came back." She looked at him for exactly 1 second, not surprised, not performing the absence of surprise, just registering the reality of the moment with the same attention she gave everything. "Okay," she said. "Walk me with." She moved toward the ambulance bay, and Oakes fell into step beside her. 2 of his soldiers adjusted naturally to flank without being asked. She didn't look back at Kane. She didn't need to. What she learned in the next 4 minutes, walking fast through the ambulance bay with Oakes, talking in the compressed shorthand of operational briefings, was this. A gang-affiliated crew had attempted to intercept a federal witness transport 3 blocks from North Vale. The transport had been rerouted. The crew, finding themselves exposed, had opened fire on the street. There were civilians down. 2 of Kane's department colleagues were among the injured, 1 critical, 1 stable. The ambush itself had been neutralized, but the aftermath was still spreading, and the nearest Level 2 trauma center with any kind of operational capacity was standing right behind her. "How many of your people do you have on site?" she asked. 8 in the entry team, 4 medical support in Vehicle 2, Oakes said. "We can integrate with your existing staff or operate parallel. Your call." "Integrate," she said immediately. "Parallel wastes time and creates handoff errors. Your medics work under my attending or they work in a separate bay with clear lines of demarcation. No crossover without communication. What's your blood supply situation?" "Type O negative, approximately 12 units. A B plasma, 8. "We're going to need more. Call County General for an emergency transfer and get it moving now." She pushed through the door into the equipment staging area. "Obi!" Her voice carried without being loud, the specific projection of someone trained to be heard in noisy environments without shouting. Obi appeared from around a supply cart. "Full trauma activation. I need all available hands in the main bay, Bay 2 and Bay 4. Get Dr. Hale." "He's already—" "Get him anyway. Tell him 6 to 9 incoming, mixed mechanism, possible GSW, and blast." Obi was already moving. She turned back to Oakes. "Your entry team stays out of the clinical areas unless I specifically request them. I don't need guns near scared patients. Station them at the exterior doors and the ambulance bay entrance. Understood. One of your people with me at the coordination point the whole time. I need a direct line to whatever's happening outside so I can anticipate, not react. Oakes nodded once. Sergeant Tran. He said it over his shoulder, and a soldier, compact, fast-eyed, stepped forward. With Lieutenant Varas. Her word is my word. Tran didn't react to the rank, just adjusted slightly and fell in on Emily's left. They went back through the double doors into the ER. Travis Kane was still there. That was the first thing Emily registered when she came back through the main entrance. Kane, standing near the intake desk with his arms crossed and his jaw set, watching her cross the floor with 8 soldiers and a federal commander arranged around her like weather systems around a center point. His expression was doing several things at once, none of them fully landing on any single emotion. She walked past him without slowing down. Donna? Emily reached the charge station. We're going to full activation. I need you managing intake and triage routing. Nothing moves to a bay without your sign-off. If it starts backing up, you call me directly and I'll clear a lane. Donna, who had spent the last 2 minutes watching events unfold with the specific stillness of someone absorbing a significant recalibration of their understanding of reality, said, You got it. What's our ventilator count? 3 functional, 1 in maintenance. Pull it from maintenance and get respiratory up here. Emily was already moving to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. She began drawing a flow chart, triage categories, bay assignments, resource allocation, in quick, sparse notations that communicated a clear operational logic to anyone who could read shorthand. Sergeant Tran, what's our ETA on first casualties? Tran had a radio at his ear. 7 minutes, 2 ambulances. First unit is a GSW, chest, male, approximately 30. Second is a pedestrian trauma, female, mid-40s, suspected broken femur and possible head injury. Bay 2 for the GSW. Dr. Hale leads, I'm support. Bay 4 for the pedestrian, I want Dr. She looked up. Where's Dr. Kim? Break room, someone said. Get her out of the break room. A nurse she didn't recognize, one of Oakes' medical team, she realized, stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Specialist Nguyen. Trauma-trained, 2 deployments. I can support on the GSW if that helps. Emily looked at her for half a second. Can you work an ultrasound? Yes, ma'am. Bay 2. You're secondary to Dr. Hale. You do not touch the patient without his acknowledgement. Clear? Clear. Good. She capped the marker. Around her, the floor had transformed. The low-grade emergency room hum had shifted into something faster and more directed. Staff finding their positions with the kind of purposeful movement that was either the result of excellent training or the human response to a person who clearly knew what they were doing and was willing to make decisions. Often, it was both. At the edge of this movement, Philip Greer appeared from the administrative corridor with the expression of a man who had heard the words federal military response and was walking toward a situation he no longer understood but desperately needed to appear to be in charge of. He stopped when he saw Emily at the whiteboard. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Oakes, looked back at Emily. Emily spoke before he could find words. Mr. Greer, I need your authorization for emergency resource override. That means pulling supplies from the scheduled surgery stock if we run short on trauma supplies. Can you give that now, or do I need to go around you? Greer blinked. Yes, you have it. Thank you. She was already turning away. Donna, note that authorization with timestamp. The first ambulance arrived at 7:04 p.m. The GSW was a 29-year-old man named, according to the paramedic handoff, Marcus Webb, no known medical history, entry wound left lateral chest, exit wound absent. His blood pressure was dropping and his breathing was wrong in the specific way that made experienced trauma nurses move faster without changing their expressions. Emily was at the bay door when they rolled him in. She did her assessment in motion, airway, breathing, circulation, the choreography of triage that happened in the hands and eyes before it happened in the conscious mind. Tension pneumo, she said. Left side. He needs a needle now. Dr. Hale was 2 steps behind her. I see it. 14 gauge, second intercostal. I know, he said, not unkindly, already reaching for the tray. She stepped back, not out of the bay, but to the position where she could see both the procedure and the door, managing the information coming in from Sergeant Tran on her left and the clinical situation in front of her simultaneously. It was a mode she knew. Her body remembered it before her mind caught up. The particular state of operational calm that wasn't the absence of urgency, but the redirection of it, channeled into precision instead of panic. She'd spent years building it and more years relying on it, and it had never once felt graceful. It felt like holding something heavy and choosing not to put it down. Second unit is 2 minutes out, Tran said quietly. What's the mechanism on the pedestrian? Hit by a vehicle during the initial engagement. Driver fled. She was conscious at scene, lost consciousness in transit. Possible intracranial. Emily raised her voice. Bay 4? Is Dr. Kim set up? Ready? Kim's voice came from across the floor. She may need CT before anything else. Get radiology on standby. The second ambulance backed in while the first team was still working. The next 40 minutes were the kind of time that compressed differently in memory than in experience. In the moment, each decision had its full weight and duration. Afterward, it would exist as a sequence of images without the time between them. Emily moved through the floor with Tran at her shoulder, checking bays, redirecting resources, making the kind of calls that were not always right, but were always made in time, which in trauma medicine was sometimes the more important variable. She made 3 mistakes. She knew they were mistakes the moment she made them. A misread on a lab value that cost 4 minutes, a misallocation of a unit of plasma that had to be corrected mid-procedure, a communication error with one of Oak's medics that created a 30-second gap in monitoring. She corrected all 3 without commentary, without visible distress, with the particular self-accountability of someone who had learned that guilt in the middle of a crisis was a luxury that patients couldn't afford. By 8:15, all incoming casualties were in bays. 3 were critical but stable. 2 had been upgraded to serious but improving. 1, a 16-year-old girl who'd been standing outside a convenience store when the shooting started, a detail that arrived in Emily's awareness and sat there with a specific heaviness, had required emergency intervention for an arterial bleed in her left leg. She was in Bay 2 now, sedated, blood pressure returning. Emily stood outside Bay 2 and took 1 breath. Then she went back to the coordination point. Shab. Kane had not left. That was the thing she became aware of around the 90-minute mark. He was still there, in the ER, which technically violated the protocols she'd established at the start of the activation, except that nobody had specifically told him to leave, and she hadn't had the bandwidth to address it. He'd moved from his original position near the intake desk to a spot against the far wall, and he'd been there long enough that he'd become part of the background, or had tried to. But he wasn't the background. He was watching. She noticed it when she crossed the floor to check on the blood supply delivery from County General. She felt it the way you feel a camera, not threatening at this point, just present, a gaze that was doing its own kind of recalibration, processing something it didn't have the right framework for yet. She thought about the look on his face when Oakes had saluted her. There had been something in it she recognized. Not the anger, she expected that, but beneath the anger, something more uncomfortable. The specific expression of someone who has built their entire operational sense of the world on a set of assumptions that just had a structural support removed. She didn't feel satisfaction about that. Or she tried not to. The truth was messier than that. There was something in her chest that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it, and she acknowledged it privately and kept moving, because she was not a person who performed nobility, and she also wasn't a person who let herself get distracted by the emotional texture of a moment when there were still patients in her bays. Dr. Hale found her at the coordination board around 8:30. He stood next to her for a moment without saying anything, looking at the board. "The web patient is stable," he said finally. "Chest tubes in, BP is holding. He's going to make it." "Good." Another silence. Then, "You want to tell me when you were going to mention the military background?" She looked at him. He was facing the board, not her. "It didn't come up," she said. "It also didn't not come up." A pause. "Combat medic?" "And trauma instructor. Before that, field triage in 2 forward operating environments." She paused. "I left because I wanted to do something quieter for a while." He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had been a slightly different night. How's that working out? About how you'd expect. He did laugh then. Short, dry, the kind of laugh that lives close to exhaustion. You told me to stay in my lane twice tonight. You stayed, she said. You were right, he said simply, and walked back toward Bay 2. It was Sergeant Tran who brought her the information about the footage, and he did it with the specific, careful neutrality of someone delivering something significant and knowing it. Lieutenant Varas, he appeared at her shoulder just after 9 p.m. Commander Oakes asked me to make you aware of something. She turned. His expression told her this wasn't operational. The hospital's external security cameras were active during the initial contact with the federal convoy. The footage was automatically flagged and pulled as part of our incident documentation. A brief pause. In reviewing the full feed for the relevant time frame, our team identified footage from the interior cameras as well. The hospital system is networked. Emily was quiet. There's footage from earlier this evening, Tran continued, and footage from previous shift. Commander Oakes has flagged it for the incident record, given that it documents conduct by a county law enforcement officer toward a member of our response team. Another pause. You. She looked at him for a moment. What kind of footage? A pattern, he said. Multiple incidents. Some of it, the physical contact from approximately 2 weeks ago, is clear and unambiguous. She thought about her notes, stacked in the drawer of her apartment. Who else has seen it? Commander Oakes and our legal advisor. At this point, that's all. When does it go into the formal record? That process initiates automatically at 800 tomorrow, as part of standard incident documentation. Emily nodded slowly. One more thing, Tran said. He glanced across the room. Not obviously, just a slight shift of his eyes. Officer Kane has been on the floor for 2 hours and 17 minutes. He made a phone call approximately 40 minutes ago. Our communications team picked up the outbound number. It belongs to Administrator Greer. She absorbed this. What was the substance of the call? We don't have the content, just the connection. She looked across the ER toward Greer's office. The light under the door was on. Thank you, Sergeant, she said. He gave her a small nod and moved away. Emily stood at the coordination board for a moment longer, alone in the way that isn't about physical proximity, surrounded by 30 people and completely separate from them, in the particular solitude of someone who has just understood the shape of what's coming. She picked up a marker and made one last notation on the board, updating the status of Bay 3. Then she walked across the ER floor, past the intake desk, past the nurses' station where Donna was managing the tail end of the chaos with her usual controlled precision, past the area where Kane was still stationed against the far wall. She passed close enough to him that they were briefly in each other's immediate space, and she did not slow down, did not look at him, did not alter her path by a single degree. She knocked twice on Philip Greer's office door. Come in, he said. She opened the door. He was at his desk, phone in hand, and the particular quality of his expression when he saw her, the fractional movement of the phone away from his ear, the composed way he set it down, too composed, the kind of deliberate neutral that required active production, told her what she'd already suspected. Ms. Varas, he said. I need 5 minutes, she said. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. The incident tonight, she began, has been documented under federal incident protocols. That means the full security archive for this facility, interior and exterior, is now part of the official federal record. That process is automatic and it's already in motion. She kept her voice level. I wanted you to be aware of that before 800 tomorrow. Greer's hands, which had been flat on the desk, moved slightly. I see. I also want to be clear about something. She leaned forward, just slightly. Whatever conversation you just had, or were about to have, whoever suggested there might be a way to manage what's in that footage before it becomes formal, I want you to understand that the window for that has closed. She paused. I'm not saying this is a threat. I'm saying it because it's accurate, and I think you deserve accurate information. The office was quiet. From outside the closed door, the sounds of the ER continued, beeping monitors, voices, The institutional hum of a place still processing the evening. Greer looked at her. He was an intelligent man. She'd known that from the first meeting, under all the institutional self-interest. And she could see him arriving at the place where intelligent people arrived when they ran out of room to maneuver, the place of reckoning. "What do you want?" he said, and his voice had lost something, the smoothness, the administrative gloss. "I want what I've always wanted," she said, "to do my job without being harassed, to have my complaints taken seriously, and I want you to stop protecting someone who doesn't deserve it." He was quiet for a long moment. "The footage," he started. "If there's footage of what you described in your original complaint, there is, then you know what you have to do." She stood up. "I'd suggest you do it before someone else does it for you." She walked out of the office, pulling the door gently closed behind her. The ER was quieter now, still active, still running, but the peak had passed, and the floor had settled into the particular rhythm of a unit that has absorbed something large and is now processing the aftermath. Nurses charting, residents reviewing, the low beeping of stable monitors. Emily walked to the break room, filled a paper cup with water, and drank it standing over the sink. Her hands, she noticed, were entirely steady. She didn't know if that was a good thing or not, and she didn't spend time analyzing it. When she came back onto the floor, Commander Oakes was waiting near the coordination board with his arms at his sides and the expression of someone who had navigated enough complicated situations to recognize when one had reached a significant juncture. "Your floor team performed well tonight," he said. "They always do," she said. "Tonight they just had more to work with." He looked at her for a moment. "You know there's going to be a formal after-action review. Given the incident documentation, it'll go beyond standard debrief." "I know." "Your name is going to be in it prominently. That creates a certain visibility." "I know that too." He nodded. "For what it's worth, and I'm saying this off the record, what you did tonight saved lives. Not just the casualties. The operational picture could have gone very differently without competent coordination on the inside." He paused. "You didn't have to be here." "I was already here," she said simply. He seemed to consider that. Then he extended his hand. She shook it. "Get some rest, Lieutenant," he said. "Retired," she said. He almost smiled. "Right." He turned to leave, then stopped. "The incident report drops at 800. The officer in question will be notified by his department. After that, well, things tend to move quickly in these situations." He walked back toward the ambulance bay. Emily stood at the coordination board for a moment, looking at the status grid. Bay 2, stable. Bay 3, stable. Bay 4, stable. The 16-year-old girl from the convenience store was in recovery. Marcus Webb had a chest tube and a blood pressure and a pulse, which was everything. She picked up a red marker and drew a line through the active activation status, marking the incident closed. She turned around. Kane was 10 feet away. He'd moved from the wall. He was standing in the open space between the nurses' station and the trauma bay corridor, and the expression on his face was something she hadn't seen from him before. Not the anger, not the authority, not the performed contempt. Just a man standing very still in a room where the ground had shifted under him and he hadn't found his footing yet. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then his radio crackled. His department, a voice she didn't recognize, and he reached for it reflexively, and that small automatic motion seemed to remind him of something or return him to something, because the expression on his face changed, closed, reassembled itself into something harder and more familiar. "This isn't done," he said. His voice was quiet, not menacing. She'd heard his menacing voice, and this wasn't it. This was something smaller, something that was trying to be certainty and landing as something else. She looked at him for one moment longer. "You're right," she said. "It isn't." She walked to the nurse's station, set down the marker, and picked up the chart for Bay 2. Behind her, she heard Kane's boots on the floor, moving toward the exit, toward the door, away from the ER and the soldiers and the cameras and the coordination board with her handwriting all over it. She heard the double doors swing open and the brief intrusion of night air, and then the doors closing again. And then the sound of his footsteps was gone. Donna appeared at her elbow. The administrator's office light just went off, she said quietly. He left early. Emily looked up from the chart. Who's covering admin overnight? Night supervisor, Carol Marsh. Does Carol know about the federal documentation process? She will in about 3 minutes, Donna said. And there was something in her voice, well, not quite satisfaction, not quite relief, that Emily recognized. The specific tone of someone who has watched a thing take too long and is now watching it begin. Good, Emily said. She went back to the chart. It was 9:47 p.m. The ER hummed around her, settling into its nighttime register. Quieter, steadier, the particular cadence of a place that had absorbed the worst of the evening and was still standing. She worked until midnight, finishing her documentation with the same care she brought to everything, thorough, accurate, leaving nothing to interpretation. She wrote the incident notes for Bay 2. She wrote the coordination log for the activation. She included the timeline, the resource allocations, the decisions and their rationales, the 3 mistakes she'd made and how they'd been corrected. She signed it Emily Varas, RN, and dated it and filed it. Then she filed one more document, a supplemental to her original complaint, referencing the federal incident record number and noting, without editorializing, that surveillance documentation now supported the original complaint in full. She filed it to the hospital's compliance department, to the county oversight board, and because Sergeant Tran had given her the correct address when she asked, simply and without explanation, and he had provided it simply and without asking for one, to the 44th Medical Response Unit's legal advisor. She logged out of the system at 12:08 a.m. In the locker room, she changed back into her street clothes. She sat on the bench for a moment with her bag in her lap, and she was tired, genuinely, physically tired, the kind that went all the way down. But underneath the tiredness was something else, something that had been absent for weeks and was only now, cautiously, returning. Not victory. Too early for that, and she knew better than to call anything a victory before it was finished, but something close to solid ground. She stood up, shouldered her bag, and walked out. The parking lot was quiet. The black SUVs were gone. The ambulance bay lights reflected off the wet asphalt in the long orange stripes of sodium vapor lamps. She walked to her car, unlocked it, sat down. She didn't take the breath this time. She already knew what came next. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't know until the following morning, when her phone lit up at 6:43 a.m. with a call from a number she didn't recognize and a voice that said, "Ms. Varas, my name is Investigator Reyes with the Harwick County Office of Professional Standards, and we need to speak with you about some footage we've received," was that the thing already in motion was moving faster than anyone had anticipated, and that Kane, in the hours between leaving North Vale and that phone call, had done something. She picked up on the second ring. "This is Varas." The voice on the other end was professional and measured in the way that investigators learn to be. Not warm, not cold, the specific neutral of someone who needed information before they could afford opinions. Investigator Reyes, Office of Professional Standards, Harwick County. He confirmed her name, her employment at North Vale, her involvement in the previous night's activation. Then he said, "Ms. Varas, we received the federal incident package at 05:30 this morning. I've reviewed the surveillance footage included in that documentation." A pause that had weight to it. "I need to ask, are you available to come in today? What time?" "As early as you can manage. There have been some developments overnight that are time-sensitive." She looked at her apartment ceiling. The light coming through the curtains was thin and gray, early morning light that hadn't committed to anything yet. "What kind of developments?" Another pause. Longer. "Officer Kane filed a counter-complaint at 11:48 p.m. last night, against you, alleging falsification of incident documentation and interference with law enforcement duties." Reyes's voice remained even. "Given the federal footage that arrived 4 hours later, the timing creates a situation that, well, it requires a conversation." Emily sat up slowly. "I'll be there at 9, she said. The Office of Professional Standards occupied the 3rd floor of the Harwick County Municipal Building, a mid-century concrete structure that had been renovated just enough to avoid condemnation without achieving anything that could honestly be called improvement. The hallways smelled like old carpet and recycled air. The waiting area had chairs with thin cushions and a wall clock that was 4 minutes fast. Emily arrived at 8:53 and sat in one of the chairs with her bag on her lap and her documentation folder inside it. The printed copies she'd made at the FedEx office on Route 9 at 7 that morning, organized by date, cross-referenced with the federal incident record number she'd gotten from Sergeant Tran's contact card. She had not slept. She was aware of that in her body. The particular flatness behind the eyes, the slight delay in her processing that she recognized and compensated for. She'd eaten a banana and half a container of yogurt in the car because she knew better than to walk into an interrogation, which was what this effectively was, on an empty stomach. Reyes turned out to be a compact man in his late 40s with close-cropped gray hair and the particular posture of a former military or law enforcement who'd made the lateral move to internal affairs, someone who'd once been on the other side of this table and was precise about being fair because of it, or in spite of it. He had a partner, a younger woman named Investigator Solis, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, who took notes without appearing to. Emily cataloged them both in the first 30 seconds and adjusted accordingly. The conference room was small. A table, 4 chairs, a whiteboard with nothing on it, a camera mounted in the corner ceiling. Standard. "Thank you for coming in," Reyes began. "Of course." He opened a folder. "I want to walk through the timeline, and I need you to correct me if anything's wrong." He looked up. Officer Kane's counter-complaint alleges that on the evening of the incident, you actively directed military personnel to restrict his access to the facility, falsely claiming security authority you didn't possess, and that you subsequently fabricated entries in the incident log to misrepresent your role and his conduct. Emily let him finish. "Those allegations are false," she said. "I assumed you'd say that." Not dismissively, just noting it. "Walk me through the evening." She did. 38 minutes, beginning from the moment the first vehicle pulled into the lot. She was precise about time and sequence, referencing her documentation where it was relevant, noting clearly where she was certain and where she was approximating. When she got to the part about Oakes's salute and Kane's presence in the room, she described it without editorializing, what was said, what she observed, the sequence of events. Reyes listened without interrupting. When she finished, Solis looked up from her notepad. "When you went to Administrator Greer's office at approximately 9 p.m., what was the purpose of that conversation?" "To inform him of the federal documentation process and its timeline, to make sure he understood what was in the record before it became formal." "Did you make any threats?" "No." "Did you suggest there would be consequences if he didn't take certain actions?" Emily considered this carefully. "I told him accurately what the situation was. I told him the window for managing the footage had closed. Whether that constitutes a threat depends on how you define the word." Solis wrote something. Reyes watched Emily. "The counter-complaint," Emily said. "What time did you say he filed it?" 11:48 p.m. "The activation concluded at approximately 9:30. I filed my supplemental complaint at 11:52 p.m. She paused. "He filed 4 minutes before me." Reyes looked at her. "Yes. That's not a coincidence." "No," he said. "It's probably not." There was a silence in which all 3 of them occupied the same understanding without naming it. "I have documentation going back 6 weeks, Emily said. She opened the folder and placed it on the table. Neat stacks, chronological, flagged. Every interaction. Dates, times, witnesses. I kept notes because I was trained to document what I observed, and what I observed was a pattern." Reyes picked up the first page and read it. He read it the way people read things when they're absorbing rather than skimming, slowly, with stillness. He turned to the second page. "How long have you been keeping this?" he asked. "Since the 3rd week of October." He looked up. "That's 8 weeks of documentation." "Yes." Solis had stopped writing. She was reading the second stack of pages now, the one Emily had placed in front of her. The room was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Varas," Reyes said, "I'm going to be direct with you. The federal footage it's significant. The physical contact incident alone creates a serious misconduct case. Combined with what you've given me here, and given the timing of last night's counter-complaint," he stopped, started again. This is going to move quickly. I want you to be prepared for that. I'm prepared. There will be pressure. He said it plainly. Kane has been with this department for 11 years. He has relationships. Not everyone is going to be neutral about this. I know. Some of those relationships include people in this building. She looked at him steadily. Are you one of them? He met her gaze. No, I'm not. She believed him, which didn't mean she was certain, but it was enough. What she didn't know, walking back to her car at 10:40 a.m. with the thin winter light finally deciding on something, and the trees along the municipal building's parking lot standing bare and indifferent. What she didn't know was that the pressure Reyes had warned her about had already started moving. She found out at 11:15 when Donna called. You need to know something, Donna said, skipping any greeting, which meant it was significant. Greer called an emergency meeting this morning. Staff meeting, 7 a.m., before most of the night shift had even gone home. He spent 40 minutes talking about protocols and documentation standards and, this is the part, unverified allegations against facility partners. A pause. He didn't use your name. He didn't use Kane's name. But everyone in that room knew exactly what he was talking about. Emily sat in her car with the engine running and the heat on low. Who was there? Most of the day shift nurses, 3 residents, Dr. Kim, Dr. Hale. Another pause. Dr. Hale walked out after 20 minutes. She registered that, filed it. What was the tone? Careful, Donna said. That's the word. Like he'd been advised to be careful. Everything framed as policy, nothing as opinion. A beat. Emily, he's laying the groundwork. For what? I don't know exactly, but it felt like someone telling a story before someone else can tell it first. After she hung up, Emily sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel and the heat running and the bare trees not moving. Greer had gotten ahead of her. Not far ahead, maybe not far enough to matter, but ahead. And behind the careful policy language was a man calculating his own exposure, which meant he was still, at some level, trying to protect Kane or protect himself or both. Which meant the institutional machinery that had been ignoring her complaint for 8 weeks was now actively engaged in self-preservation rather than resolution. She pulled out her phone and called the number for the 44th legal advisor. It went to voicemail. She left a clear, precise message. The administrator's morning meeting, the framing, the timing. She asked for a call back. She said it was time-sensitive. Then she drove back to North Vale because she still had a shift starting at 2. The floor felt different when she walked in. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody stopped talking. Nobody looked away. But there was a texture to the silence around certain people, the kind that meant a conversation had recently ended, and Emily had been its subject. Obi met her at the station with a look that was trying to be neutral and landing about 70% of the way there. How are you doing? Fine, she said. What's the patient census? 11 in bays, 3 pending discharge. It's been quiet. He hesitated. There was a message for you from Dr. Hale. He wants to talk when you have a minute. She found Hale in the small physician workroom off the main corridor, standing at the counter with a coffee he wasn't drinking, looking at something on the wall that wasn't anything. She closed the door. I heard you left the meeting, she said. 40 minutes of that was about 20 minutes too many. He turned around. He looked tired. Not emergency tired, which she was used to, but the other kind. The kind that came from navigating institutional politics, which he was visibly bad at and had clearly been doing all morning. He framed it as a leadership message, protecting the facility's relationships with law enforcement. I know. He used the phrase due process 4 times. Hale said it with the specific irritation of someone who knows when a phrase is being used accurately and when it's being used as furniture. Like the concern is your complaint being unfair to Kane. It's a tactic, Emily said. A transparent one. I walked out because it was transparent, he said. And because I watched you run that floor last night. I watched you correct 3 decisions in real time without drama, manage 9 incoming casualties, and integrate a federal response team into our staff so cleanly that by the end of it, half the nurses didn't remember which medics were ours and which were Oak's. He stopped. Picked up the coffee, put it down. And now I'm listening to a 40-minute meeting about due process. She looked at him. Is there something you need from me, Dr. Hale, or are you telling me this because you needed to tell someone? A beat, then both, probably. Okay? She leaned against the door. Then here's what I need from you. If this investigation asks for a statement about last night, give one. Tell them what you observed, accurately, specifically, without editorializing. That's all. That's it? That's it. He was quiet for a moment. What happens if Greer starts building a case that the emergency activation created liability for the hospital, that your role was unauthorized, that then the federal incident record, which documents my role as a requested resource by a commissioned officer of the 44th Medical Response Unit, will clarify that. He absorbed this. You thought about this already, he said. I thought about it at 4 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, she said. Not proudly, just accurately. Almost. The next escalation came at 3:17 p.m., and it didn't arrive as a conversation. It arrived as a man Emily had never seen before, walking into North Vale's main entrance in civilian clothes and asking at the front desk for Administrator Greer. He was tall, late 50s, wearing the kind of suit that said lawyer rather than business, and he had a companion, younger, carrying a document bag, who had paralegal written in the way she moved. Emily was at the nurses' station when they passed through the lobby, and she watched them the way she'd been trained to watch things, cataloging without reacting. 15 minutes later, Donna appeared at the station with a face that Emily had learned to read over 8 weeks as a reliable barometer. They're talking to Greer right now, Donna said quietly. Carol from admin says the lawyer is from Stafford and Metz. She paused. That's the firm the sheriff's department retains. Emily stared at the chart she was holding for 1 second. Then she turned back to it. Kane wasn't just filing a countercomplaint. He was bringing institutional legal resources into the building, resources that belonged to his department, which meant his department was backing him, which meant someone above Kane had made a decision about how far they were going to go to protect one of their officers. That changed the shape of what she was dealing with, not in a way that was unsurvivable, but in a way that required acknowledgement. She finished the chart note she was writing, logged out of the station, and went to the break room. She called Investigator Reyes. He picked up in 2 rings. Stafford and Metz just arrived at North Vale, she said. They're with Greer. A beat. I'm aware. We anticipated this. How far ahead of this are you? Far enough. He paused. There's something else. We've been trying to reach Officer Kane for a follow-up interview since this morning. He hasn't responded. His department rep says he's unavailable. Well, what does that mean? It means he's with his own legal team, and they've advised him not to engage until they understand what's in the federal package. Another pause. Ms. Varas, the footage? I've had our video forensics team review it this morning. The physical contact incident, the prior harassment incidents. There's no ambiguity in what's documented. I know, she said. I was there. What I'm telling you is that his legal team is going to know that too once they see it, which means the strategy won't be to dispute the footage. The strategy will be to make the story about something else. A pause. Make sure everything you've filed is airtight. Every date, every name, every timestamp. It is. I know you believe that. Check it again anyway. She checked it again. At the break room table, folder open, going through every page with the specific attention of someone looking for what they might have missed. Not because she expected to find errors, but because the discipline of checking was its own protection. She found one date she'd written in shorthand that could be misread. She corrected it. She found one witness name where she'd used a nickname instead of a full name. She corrected that too. Small things. But Reyes was right. Small things were where stories got rewritten. At 4:50 p.m., Philip Greer appeared on the floor. He walked with the careful deliberateness of a man who had spent the last 6 hours with lawyers and emerged from the experience with a strategy but not quite confidence. He came to the nurses' station, waited until Emily looked up from her chart, and said with the specific formal tone of someone reciting language they'd been given, Ms. Varas, I need to inform you that effective immediately, the hospital is placing you on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of the ongoing investigation. The station went quiet. Donna, 3 feet away, went absolutely still. Emily looked at Greer. On what basis? The hospital has determined that the circumstances surrounding last night's incident and the associated complaints create an operational situation that, on what basis? She said again. Same volume, same cadence. Greer's throat moved. There is an active counter-complaint from a law enforcement officer that alleges misconduct during a patient care event. Until that is resolved, there is an active complaint from me, filed 6 weeks ago, documenting physical assault by that same officer. The counter-complaint was filed 4 minutes before I filed a supplemental report supported by federal surveillance footage. She kept her voice level, every word precise. If the hospital is suspending me on the basis of an unsubstantiated counter-complaint, while ignoring documented federal evidence of misconduct, I need that decision in writing, with the specific policy basis cited within the hour. Greer's jaw tightened. That can be arranged, he said carefully. Good. She set down her chart. I'll wait. He left. Nobody in the immediate area said anything for several seconds. Then Obi, from the other side of the station, said quietly and without looking up, "That was something." Emily picked her chart back up. She had 2 more patient notes to finish before her shift ended, suspended or not, and she was going to finish them because that was what she did. The written notice arrived at 5:38 p.m. It cited ongoing investigation and operational necessity, phrases that legal teams loved for their precise vagueness, and referenced a section of the employee handbook related to active law enforcement complaints. Emily read it twice, photographed it, emailed it to 3 places. She cleared out her locker without drama, nothing personal stored there anyway, just a spare pair of gloves and a tube of hand cream, and said goodbye to Donna, who walked her to the elevator and stood in front of it for a moment with the expression of someone who had things to say and was making the professional decision not to say all of them. "You know this is wrong," Donna said. "Yes. What are you going to do?" "Exactly what I've been doing." Emily pressed the down button. "Document everything, stay accurate, and wait." "Waiting is hard," Donna said. "I know." The elevator opened. "Emily." Donna said her name like it was a complete sentence. Like it contained everything she couldn't say in the hallway of a hospital where cameras were running and lawyers were in the building. Emily looked at her. "I'll be okay." The doors closed. She was in the parking lot, key in hand, when her phone lit up. It was a number she recognized. Not Reyes, not Tran, not anyone from North Vale. The area code was DC. She stopped walking and answered. "Lieutenant Varas." The voice was female, controlled, with the particular diction of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "My name is Colonel Andrea Marsh, Office of the Judge Advocate General. I was briefed this evening on the North Vale incident and the associated documentation." Emily stood between 2 parked cars in the gray afternoon light and said nothing, because this was the kind of call that required you to let it arrive before you responded. "I'll be direct," Marsh continued. "The footage documented in Commander Oakes' incident report has been reviewed at a level above my office. What it shows, the assault, the pattern of harassment directed at a former service member in a civilian medical facility, has generated interest that goes beyond the county level." A pause. "The Hartwick County Sheriff's Department has a federal grant compliance relationship with the Department of Defense. That relationship creates oversight mechanisms that are now," a careful word choice, "active." Emily absorbed this. "What does that mean practically?" "It means the investigation of Officer Kane is no longer solely a county matter. It means the people above Philip Greer are going to receive a call tomorrow morning that they are not going to enjoy." Another pause. "And it means that your administrative leave, which I understand was just issued, may be very short-lived." Emily looked at the concrete in front of her. "Why are you calling me directly?" she asked. "Because you deserve to know the shape of what's coming," Marsh said. "And because someone who runs a trauma activation the way you ran one last night, while simultaneously managing a 6-week harassment campaign without breaking protocol or losing her temper," a pause, "that person deserves to walk into tomorrow with accurate information." The wind moved through the parking lot. Somewhere across the lot, a car started. "Is there anything I need to do?" Emily asked. "Be available tomorrow morning. Have your documentation ready. Be exactly what you've already been. Marsh paused. One more thing. Kane, we got his location about an hour ago. He's with his department's legal team at the Stafford and Metz offices downtown. Another pause, and in this one, there was something with texture. Not quite satisfaction, but close. He's been there since 2 p.m. Our read is that his own lawyers are telling him what the footage shows. Emily thought about that. How bad is it for him? She asked. You've seen the footage, Marsh said. I haven't, actually. I know what I experienced. I haven't seen how it looks from the outside. A silence. It's bad, Marsh said simply. It's very bad. Emily stood in the parking lot after the call ended, phone in hand, for longer than she intended to. She was not naive enough to call this over. She'd been in enough situations to know that the distance between very bad for him and finished was still measurable, still navigable by people with resources and relationships, and the particular institutional stamina of those who'd never had to face full accountability before. Kane still had his badge. His department was still protecting him, or trying to. The administrative leave was still in effect. Tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. But something had shifted. She felt it in the same way she'd felt operational momentum in the field. That specific weight change when the tide of a situation moves from defensive to offensive, not dramatic, not loud, just inexorable. She got in her car. She drove home. At her apartment, she changed into running clothes, went out, and ran 6 miles instead of 5, past the river, past the turnaround point, further into the evening than she usually went, until her legs and lungs were honest about the distance, and her mind had stopped producing language and was just moving through the cold air in the particular quiet of a body working at its limit. When she got home, she showered, ate actual food, and sat at her kitchen table with her documentation folder and went through it one final time. Not because Reyes had told her to, not because she needed to, but because thoroughness was the thing she controlled when she controlled nothing else. She was on the second-to-last page when her phone buzzed. Not a call. A text. Unknown number. Local area code. Not the DC number. Not Reyes. Not anyone in her contacts. 3 words. Drop it. Now. She looked at the message for a long moment. Then she set the phone face down on the table, picked up her pen, and finished reading the last page. She was still sitting there when her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo. Her car. Her parking lot. Taken from the angle of the building entrance less than an hour ago while she'd been on her run. The timestamp in the corner read 7:43 p.m. She screenshotted both messages, forwarded them to Reyes, forwarded them to Marsh's number, and then sat at her kitchen table and made herself finish eating. Not because she wasn't shaken. She was. The photograph had a specific quality that text threats didn't. It was evidence of physical presence, of someone in her lot, in her neighborhood, near her car, while she was alone on a dark running trail. That landed differently than words. She acknowledged that honestly, in the privacy of her own chest, because she'd learned a long time ago that pretending fear wasn't present didn't make you braver. It just made you stupid. But she also knew what the photograph was for. It wasn't a prelude to action. It was a pressure tactic. The last move of someone whose legal options were narrowing and who was hoping she'd do something reactive. File a panicked complaint that looked like escalation. Disappear from the process. Make a mistake that gave his lawyers something to work with. She ate her dinner. She washed the dish. She checked her door locks, which she'd already checked, and then she went to bed. She didn't sleep well. That was honest, too. Reyes called at 7:43 the next morning. I got your forwarded messages, he said, before she'd said anything beyond her name. The photo especially. He paused, choosing his word. That's a problem for him. Is it enough to act on? It's enough to escalate the investigation significantly. Witness intimidation in an active misconduct case. A beat. Miss Varas, I want to ask you directly. Do you feel you're in physical danger? She thought about it honestly. No. I think it was intended to scare me out of the process. I don't think it was a genuine threat. I agree with your read, but I'm treating it as one regardless because that's the appropriate response. Another pause. I've been on the phone since 6 a.m. There were some developments overnight I need to walk you through. She poured coffee and stood at her kitchen counter. Go ahead. Kane's legal team made contact with my office at 9 p.m. last night. They wanted to know the full scope of the federal documentation, specifically what footage existed and for what time periods. Reyes let that land. We told them what was in the formal record. We did not tell them about the supplemental footage our video forensics team extracted from the hospital's archived security system, footage going back 10 weeks. Emily was quiet. There are 14 separate incidents documented in that archive, Reyes said. 14 interactions between Kane and staff at North Vale, at least 9 of which involve conduct that meets the threshold for misconduct or harassment. Several involve patients present as witnesses. 3 involve physical proximity to you specifically. He paused. His team thought they were dealing with one incident. They are dealing with 14. She set her coffee down. When did they find out? She asked. This morning. My office is delivering the full evidence inventory to the department and to Stafford and Metz at 9 a.m. A pause that had something in it. Not satisfaction exactly, but the particular quality of an investigator who had built something solid. I expect the conversation at that law firm today is going to be significantly different from the conversation they had yesterday. After she hung up, she stood at the counter for a long moment. 14 incidents. She documented 8 in her notes. The cameras had caught things she hadn't even written down. Moments she'd moved through and filed away, and not cataloged because she was trying to stay operational, stay functional, not make every encounter a formal event. She'd been more alone in this than she'd realized, and also, apparently, less alone than she'd known. The cameras had been watching the whole time. Colonel Marsh's office called at 8:30 with instructions. Emily was to attend a formal interview at the Harwick County Office of Professional Standards at 11 a.m., this time accompanied by a JAG representative, one Lieutenant Commander Priya Nair, who would be present in an advisory capacity given the federal interest in the case. Emily had 45 minutes with Nair before the interview. Nair was younger than Emily had expected. Early 30s, precise in speech, with the particular quality of someone who had prepared thoroughly and was now efficiently deploying that preparation. She walked Emily through the federal interest in the case in clear terms. The DoD grant compliance angle was real but secondary. The primary lever was that Kane's misconduct had been directed at a former service member, documented on federal equipment during a federally documented incident. That gave Marsh's office standing that a purely civilian complaint wouldn't have had. He's going to try to make this about your conduct during the activation, Nair said. His team is floating a theory that your role last night was unauthorized, that you exceeded your authority as a civilian nurse by taking operational control. I was requested by Commander Oakes, Emily said. I know. I have the request documentation, but the argument they'll make is that you leveraged that request to manufacture a situation that benefited your complaint, that you used the activation to discredit Kane in front of witnesses. Emily looked at her. 9 civilians were in trauma bays last night. A 16-year-old girl nearly bled out in Bay 2, Marcus Webb. I know, Nair said. The argument is bad faith and it won't hold, but you need to know it's coming so you don't react to it. A pause. When they say it, and they will say it, you answer with clinical specifics, timeline, patient outcomes, decision rationale. You make the argument irrelevant by making the medicine undeniable. I can do that. I know you can. Nair closed her folder. One more thing. There's a witness, one of Kane's patrol partners, Officer Dennis Morales. He reached out to my office this morning voluntarily. He has information about Kane's conduct that goes beyond what's in the footage. Emily absorbed this. What kind of information? He'll explain it himself. He's meeting with Reyes at 11:30. Nair paused. From what I understand, Kane's behavior toward you wasn't new. Morales has been aware of a pattern of targeting for some time. He didn't come forward earlier because... She stopped. Because Kane is his partner, Emily said. Nair said. As of this morning, Morales requested reassignment. The 11 a.m. interview lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. The sheriff's department's representative was a captain named Wes Farlow, A man in his early 60s who had the bearing of someone who had spent decades working the institutional machinery from the inside and was now sitting across a table from evidence that one of his officers had broken the machinery and was dealing with that reality in the specific, grinding way of a person for whom loyalty and accountability had just been placed in direct opposition. He was not hostile to Emily, but he was not comfortable, and his discomfort was its own kind of presence in the room. A reminder that this wasn't abstract, that real institutional weight was being displaced, that consequences ripple outward past the person who caused them. Nair was at Emily's left. Reyes ran the interview. Solus took notes. They played footage, not all 14 incidents, 6 of them, selected, with timestamps, with the clinical precision of a presentation that had been prepared carefully and was intended not to persuade, but to document. Emily watched herself on screen in the grainy color of a hospital security camera and experienced the particular dissociation of seeing your own experiences from the outside, the way you look smaller on camera than you feel in the moment, the way violence looks more mundane when it isn't happening to you right now. The sleeve incident was clear. There was no angle from which it was ambiguous. Farlow watched it without expression. When it ended, he was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he said, and then stopped. Reyes waited. Farlow tried again. "How long was this going on before anyone at the department was aware?" "Based on the timeline in our documentation," Reyes said, "the first incident occurred 10 weeks ago. The first formal complaint from Miss Varas was filed 7 weeks ago." 7 weeks. Farlow said it like he was testing its weight. Administrator Greer's office received it and responded by placing Ms. Varas on temporary leave, Reyes said. "The complaint was not forwarded to your department." Another silence. "Captain Farlow." Emily spoke for the first time since the footage had run. "I'm not interested in making this harder than it needs to be. I'm interested in not going back to work every day, wondering if the next time he grabs me is the last warning I get." Farlow looked at her. He had the eyes of someone who'd been around long enough to know the difference between someone working a situation and someone telling the truth, and she watched him land slowly and with some difficulty on which one she was. "Kane is currently on administrative hold pending this investigation," he said. "His access to all county facilities has been suspended as of this morning." It was not an apology. It was a fact. But it was the right fact. "Thank you," she said. Morales' information, delivered to Reyes at 11:30 while Emily and Nair were still in the building, was worse than anyone had anticipated. She didn't hear all of it immediately. Reyes pulled her aside at 12:40 with the condensed version, speaking quietly in the hallway outside the interview room, with the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by people's capacity for institutional failure, but hadn't entirely stopped being frustrated by it. Kane had been flagged twice in the previous 4 years for conduct complaints, both times involving civilians who'd been present during his arrests, both times involving allegations of excessive pressure, intimidation, one allegation of physical contact. Both complaints had been reviewed internally and closed without formal action. Morales knew about both. He'd been present for one of them. He'd stayed quiet because Kane was his partner, because the department had cleared him, because the institutional logic of it was handled had been enough to make silence feel like something other than complicity. "Until last night," Reyes said. "What changed?" Emily asked. "He watched you run that activation." Reyes paused. He said, and I'm quoting here, "I watched Kane treat that woman like she was nobody for 2 months, and then I watched her save 6 people's lives in 40 minutes, and I thought, what is wrong with us?" Another pause. "His words." Emily was quiet. "He also told us something else," Reyes said. "The falsified complaint Kane filed against you, the one alleging negligence during patient care. Morales helped him write it. He's saying he didn't know at the time that it was being used as a formal submission, that he thought it was internal notes. That's not credible," Emily said flatly. "No," Reyes agreed. "It's not. But it puts him in a difficult position, and it means there's a second officer who has accountability exposure here." He looked at her. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know the full shape of it, not because I need anything from you about Morales." She thought about Dennis Morales, who she'd never met, who'd watched his partner bully a woman for 2 months and stayed quiet because silence was easier than the alternative. She didn't feel generous about that. She didn't feel the need to perform generosity about it. "What happens to him?" she asked. "That depends on how cooperative he continues to be and what the internal investigation determines." Reyes paused. "The falsification of a formal complaint is serious regardless of his claimed role in it." "Good," she said. "Not with anger, just precisely." Eat. Philip Greer resigned at 3 p.m. She found out from Donna, who sent a text that said only, "Greer out, effective immediately, Carol Marsh taking interim." And then, after a brief pause, "Not that Carol. Different Carol. Our Carol. The good one." Emily was in her car outside a pharmacy, having stopped to pick up the prescription she'd been putting off for a week, and she read the text in the parking lot and then went inside and waited in line and paid for her prescription and got back in her car. She wasn't surprised. Greer had been in an impossible position since the moment the federal package arrived. His fingerprints were on the suspension notice, on 7 weeks of inaction, on the lawyer meeting that the cameras had presumably also caught. He'd understood that, which was probably why he'd left early the night before and why the resignation was happening now, while there was still some procedural dignity available to him, rather than later when there might not be. She didn't feel satisfaction, or she felt something adjacent to it and chose not to examine it too closely, because she'd learned that satisfaction in the middle of a thing that wasn't finished yet was a way of going soft, right, when you needed to stay sharp. There was still Kane. The press got the story at 4:15. She didn't know how, a leak probably, from someone in the department or the county building who understood that controlled disclosure beat uncontrolled exposure. The story that ran on the Harwick County Herald's website at 4:40 was careful and sparse. Sheriff's Department officer suspended amid federal misconduct investigation, hospital administrator resigns, no names yet. But the shape was clear. Her phone rang 4 times in the first hour after the story posted. She didn't answer any of them. 2 unknown numbers, one from a local news station she recognized from their frequency on the scanner, one from a number that resolved to a reporter she'd had no prior contact with. She called Nair instead. "I saw it," Nair said. "Don't speak to media, not yet, not until the formal investigation concludes." "I wasn't planning to." "I know. I'm telling you anyway because sometimes people change their minds when they're tired and frustrated, and someone offers them a platform." A pause. "Are you tired and frustrated?" "Yes." "Then stay off the phone." A beat. "How are you doing?" It was the first time anyone in an official capacity had asked that question without it being a procedural warm-up to something else. Emily thought about the honest answer, which was complicated. Tired, yes, and something that wasn't quite relief because it was too early for relief, and something else underneath that she didn't have a clean word for. The specific state of a person who has been braced for impact for weeks and is now in the moment after the impact when the body hasn't quite believed yet that it survived. "I'm managing," she said. "That's enough for today," Nair said. "Get some sleep tonight. Tomorrow is going to be significant." "What happens tomorrow?" "Kane's suspension hearing. Department level, but given the federal oversight, it's not going to be a quiet process." A pause. "Reyes will formally present the 14 incident documentation. Morales will give his statement. The falsified complaint will be addressed." She paused. "I expect Kane's legal team to attempt to negotiate rather than contest. When people see the footage, they don't usually want to contest." Done. She went to bed at 10 and lay in the dark with her eyes open for a while, listening to the building. The neighbor upstairs with the heavy footsteps, the water in the pipes, the low ambient sound of a city that continued regardless. She thought about the photograph, her car in the lot, taken at 7:43 p.m. She thought about who had taken it, Kane himself or someone he'd sent, and what it had felt like for him to make that choice, whether it had felt like power or desperation. And she thought it had probably felt like both, and that the difference between those two things was the difference between who he'd been 2 months ago and who he was now. She thought about Marcus Webb with a chest tube and a pulse, the 16-year-old from the convenience store whose name she'd never gotten, sleeping somewhere in the hospital with a repaired artery, and no idea what had been in motion while she was being stabilized. She thought about Donna saying sometimes waiting is hard, and meaning it, and herself saying, I'll be okay, and meaning that. She fell asleep somewhere after midnight. Bobbed. She was awake at 6, dressed by 6:30, at the municipal building by 8 for a pre-hearing briefing with Nair. The suspension hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the administrative chamber of the sheriff's department, a room she'd never been in, a process she'd never been part of. Nair had explained that her presence wasn't required, but that Reyes had recommended it, and that Farlow had approved her as a named complainant allowed to observe. She sat in the second row of the public gallery with Nair on her right, and nobody she recognized on her left. Kane came in at 9:58 with 2 lawyers from Stafford and Metz, and he looked different from the man she knew. Not smaller exactly, but contracted, pulled inward, the particular compression of a person who has spent 2 days with lawyers reviewing footage of themselves and is now in the room where the footage exists in institutional form. He didn't look at the gallery. Farlow ran the hearing with a department adjudicator beside him and a representative from the county oversight board at the end of the table. The federal oversight was represented by a JAG officer who said almost nothing and whose presence said everything. Reyes presented the case in 50 minutes, clean, ordered, without commentary, letting the documentation and footage carry the weight. The 14 incidents, the physical contact, the falsified complaint, at which point one of Kane's lawyers started to speak and was quietly stopped by the other lawyer, which told Emily everything about what they'd decided on the other side of the table. Morales gave his statement by video. He'd requested it that way, probably on legal advice, and his face on the screen was the face of a man doing something he should have done earlier and knowing it. He was precise and uncomfortable and honest, which was the minimum required, and Emily gave him the minimum credit for it. When Reyes finished, the room was quiet. The adjudicator looked at Kane's team. Does your client wish to make a statement? The lawyer on Kane's left said, We request a brief recess to confer. They got 15 minutes. Emily sat in the gallery and drank the coffee Nair had brought in a paper cup and looked at the institutional beige of the chamber walls and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she'd developed during long field deployments and had been glad to find she hadn't lost. Kane came back in and sat down, and his lawyer said they were prepared to cooperate with the investigation and did not contest the finding. Farlow read the suspension determination. Indefinite suspension with termination proceedings to follow pending the outcome of criminal referral review. The words criminal referral moved through the room with the particular gravity of institutional language that means actual consequences. Emily didn't react. She sat still and heard the words and let them be what they were. Not a victory, not a vindication, not the end of anything. Just a decision made by a room full of people who'd finally looked at what had been in front of them all along and stopped looking away. Outside afterward, on the municipal building steps in thin December light, Nair said, That's going to move to the DA's office. The assault, the falsified complaint, could take weeks, could take months. Depends on caseload and how hard his team fights. I know, Emily said. The hospital reinstatement. Greer's resignation clears the path, but the new interim administrator needs to formally rescind the leave. I'd expect that call today or tomorrow. Okay, Nair looked at her. You know that this part, the hearing, the footage, all of it, is usually where people feel something definitive. Relief, closure. I know it's not finished, Emily said. Right. A pause. But it is significantly less unfinished than it was 48 hours ago. Emily looked out at the parking lot. Gray sky, the bare trees, the particular flatness of a winter Tuesday in a mid-sized American city going about its business. He sent me a photograph of my car, she said. 2 nights ago, from my own parking lot. That's in the record, Nair said. That's part of the criminal referral. I know. Emily paused. I just want to say it out loud once. He stood in my parking lot in the dark and took a picture of my car to make me afraid. And he still walked into that hearing this morning expecting something other than what he got. Nair was quiet. That's a particular kind of person, Nair said finally. Yes, Emily said. It is. She picked up her bag and started down the steps. Her phone rang before she reached the bottom. It was a number she didn't know. She almost let it go to voicemail, and then something made her answer. The same instinct that had made her pick up Marcia's call 2 nights ago. Emily Varas? A man's voice. Not official. Not a lawyer's cadence. Yes. My name is Robert Webb. A pause. Marcus Webb is my son. She stopped on the steps. I got your name from the hospital, he said. They said you were the nurse who coordinated his care during the incident, that you made the call on the chest decompression. His voice had the particular quality of someone who had been sitting with a thing for 2 days and was only now finding words for it. He's awake. He asked me to call. Emily stood on the municipal building steps in the December light and listened. He wants to say thank you, Robert Webb said. She opened her mouth to say something professional and appropriate, and what came out instead was, how is he? Ornery, Robert Webb said, and laughed a little, the specific laugh of relief that has nowhere else to go. He's asking for real food and complaining about the TV remote. So, that's good, she said. And then because it was true, that's really good. She stood there for another moment after the call ended, on the steps, in the cold, with Nair somewhere behind her and the parking lot in front of her, and the gray sky doing nothing in particular. She thought she should feel relief. She thought this was probably what relief felt like when you'd been too braced for too long. Not a wave of something, but a slow, careful loosening, like a fist opening one finger at a time. Her phone buzzed again. This time a text. Donna, interim administrator just called. Leave rescinded. You're back on Monday. Also, Obi cried a little. Don't tell him I told you. She almost smiled. Then her phone rang again, and this time it was Reyes, and his voice when she answered had a different quality than it had carried in any previous call. Not cautious, not careful, not the measured professional neutral she'd come to expect. Something had gone wrong. Ms. Varas, he said, I need you to come back inside. What happened? A pause. Short, but with weight. The falsified complaint Kane filed against you. We've been tracing its path through the hospital's system. We found something in the routing log. Another pause. It wasn't filed alone. There were 2 signatures on the internal submission, Kane's and one other. We assumed the second was Morales. It wasn't. She turned around and looked at the building behind her. It was Dr. Marcus Hale, Reyes said. You're attending. He co-signed the negligence complaint against you 3 weeks ago. She went back inside, not running, walking the way she walked into every difficult thing, with her shoulders level and her breathing even, and the particular internal steadiness that wasn't the absence of feeling, but the management of it, which was a different thing entirely. Reyes met her in the hallway outside the administrative chamber. The hearing had concluded. The room was emptying, lawyers gathering documents, the adjudicator speaking quietly with Farlow, the JAG officer already gone. The institutional machinery was moving into its next phase, indifferent to the thing Reyes had just told her. She stopped in front of him. Show me, she said. He had a tablet. He turned it toward her and pulled up the document routing log, a system-generated timestamp trail showing every touchpoint a document made as it moved through the hospital's internal filing system. She understood how to read it because she'd spent 7 years in environments where paper trails were the difference between accountability and chaos. There it was, the falsified negligence complaint filed 3 weeks ago, Kane's user credentials in the origination field, and in the co-signature field, the credentials of the attending physician assigned to Trauma Bay 2, Dr. M. Hale. She looked at it for a long time. The thing she felt wasn't quite betrayal. Betrayal had a particular shape that required a specific kind of trust to precede it, and she hadn't trusted Hale that way, hadn't trusted anyone at North Vale that way, which she'd thought was professional caution, but was starting to understand had also been something else, something more self-protective. What she felt was closer to a particular cold clarity, the kind that arrives when a thing you didn't want to be true turns out to be true anyway, and all you can do is look at it directly. When was the routing timestamp? She asked. 3 weeks? 2 days ago? 7:40 p.m. Reyes paused. After your shift. After her shift. She'd worked with Hale that day. She remembered it. A Tuesday with a pediatric respiratory case that had required fast decisions and careful management. She'd done good work. She'd thought he knew it. 7:40 p.m. He'd waited until she'd left the building. Has he been contacted? She asked. Not yet. I wanted you to be aware first. A pause. We'll bring him in for a formal interview today if possible. He'll be on shift, she said. He works Tuesdays and Thursdays. Today is Tuesday. Reyes absorbed this. That's efficient to know. She handed the tablet back. He walked out of Greer's meeting yesterday morning, she said, partly to Reyes and partly just aloud, working through it. He said Greer's language was transparent. He told me Kane's treatment of me was wrong. He expressed... She stopped. He expressed what? Nair asked. She'd appeared at Emily's right, quiet in the way she was always quiet, present without announcing herself. Something that looked like conscience, Emily said, after the fact. She thought about what Reyes had told her about Morales. I thought, what is wrong with us? Apparently it was contagious, that belated reckoning, except that Morales had come forward voluntarily and Hale had needed a document routing log to expose him, and that difference was not small. Why? She asked Reyes. Why would he sign it? Reyes looked at her carefully. Our preliminary read, and this is based on what we're seeing in the system, not yet on any statement, is that Hale and Kane had an existing relationship. There are records of prior interactions going back about 18 months before you transferred to North Vale. Kane appears to have had some kind of leverage. We don't know what yet. Leverage, she said. That's our working theory. She thought about Hale at the coordination board the night of the activation, standing next to her, his voice carrying something that had sounded like grudging respect. She thought about the coffee he didn't drink, the laugh that lived close to exhaustion, the way he'd said you were right without dressing it up. She thought about all the things a person could know about right and wrong and still not do correctly, and the gap between those two things that people spend entire lives trying to bridge or avoid. The interview with Hale happened at 2 p.m. Emily wasn't in the room for it. She wasn't supposed to be, and she didn't request it. She waited in the same parking lot where 2 nights ago someone had photographed her car, sitting in her own car with the heat running, because Nair had told her to stay available and there was nowhere else she needed to be. She didn't use the time to compose herself because she wasn't uncomposed. She used it to think clearly about what she wanted, which was a different exercise. She wanted accuracy. She wanted the record to be correct, completely, specifically, unambiguously correct. She wanted every person who had participated in making her professional life smaller, harder, more dangerous than it should have been to be standing in front of their own choices without institutional cover. She didn't want Hale to suffer. That wasn't the same as wanting him to escape accountability. It just meant she wasn't interested in punishment as its own end. She was interested in truth, which sometimes led to punishment, but wasn't the same thing. She was aware that this was a more forgiving position than he deserved, and less forgiving than he might hope for, and she was at peace with the imprecision. Nair called at 3:18. He cooperated, she said, fully. From the beginning of the interview, no resistance. A pause. Kane approached him 14 months ago. There was an incident, a patient outcome that Hale handled incorrectly and that Kane witnessed. Not criminal, but professionally serious. Kane held it, used it. Another pause. When Kane asked him to co-sign the complaint against you, Hale said he told himself it was probably accurate, that you were probably in over your head, that the complaint was likely legitimate. Emily said nothing. He told himself a story, Nair said, that made it easier to do the wrong thing. And then he spent 3 weeks watching you do your job, and the story got harder to maintain, and then the activation happened, and the story became impossible. A pause. He said the morning after the activation, he knew he needed to come forward. He didn't. Until the routing log made it mandatory, Emily said. Yes. She looked through the windshield at the parking lot, the municipal building's concrete face, the flag above the entrance moving in the December wind. What are the consequences? She asked. The co-signature on a falsified professional complaint, under coercion, with full cooperation in the subsequent investigation. That's a different category than Kane's situation. It will go to the medical board. His hospital credentials will be reviewed. He will almost certainly face a formal censure. A pause. Whether he keeps his license depends on the board's assessment of the circumstances and his record otherwise. Another pause. His record otherwise is, by all accounts, strong. I know, Emily said. He's a good doctor. He was also complicit in an attempt to end your career. I know that too. The silence between those two facts was uncomfortable, and she let it be uncomfortable rather than resolving it artificially. People were not simple. Damage was not simple. A person could be genuinely good at one thing and genuinely wrong about another, and accountability didn't require you to flatten them into a single quality. It just required the record to be accurate. He asked, Nair said carefully, if you would be willing to hear a statement from him. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Not today. Okay. Maybe not at all. I don't know yet. That's a completely reasonable position. Tell him that whether or not I ever hear it, he should make it anyway. Write it down. Say it to someone. Not for my benefit, for his. Nair was quiet for a moment. I'll pass that on. The following 3 weeks moved with the specific momentum of institutional machinery that is finally engaged properly. Slowly in some places, faster than expected in others, indifferent to the emotional timelines of the people inside it. Kane was formally terminated from the Harwick County Sheriff's Department on the 9th day. The termination letter citing violation of use of force policy, conduct unbecoming, abuse of professional authority, and a fourth charge related to the falsified complaint. The letter was 12 paragraphs. The local paper ran 4 sentences about it, buried in the county section. The DA's office accepted the criminal referral 8 days after that. Assault, official misconduct, witness intimidation. The photograph from her parking lot was in the charging documents. His lawyer released a statement saying his client intended to contest the charges. Emily read it in her apartment on a Thursday morning and then put her phone down and made coffee and went to work. Because she was back at work. The reinstatement had been handled on a Wednesday. A brief meeting with Carol Marsh, the interim administrator, a practical woman who didn't waste either of their time with excessive formality. The paperwork was signed, the leave was rescinded. Emily's locker, which she'd cleared out, was assigned to her again. She walked onto the floor on the following Monday, and Obi was at the station, and he looked up, and his face did something complicated that resolved into an expression she didn't have a name for, but recognized. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," she said. He handed her a chart. "Bay 3's been a mess." "I know," she said. "You told me that last time." "It's still true." She took the chart and went to work. The hospital felt different, and she spent some time trying to determine whether the difference was in the building or in herself, and concluded it was both. Greer's absence had changed something structural, not dramatically, not overnight, but the specific tension that had characterized the floor for weeks, the low-grade institutional anxiety of a place where complaints were managed rather than addressed, had dissipated slightly. Carol Marsh was not a revolutionary. She was a competent administrator who preferred not to have federal investigators in her building, which was sufficient motivation for a different set of operational priorities. Donna had returned to her usual self, which meant she was the same as always, efficient, unsentimental, quietly watching everything. She said nothing to Emily about the previous weeks beyond a single comment delivered while they were both reviewing charts one afternoon. "For what it's worth, I documented my own observations from those 11 weeks, in case it was needed." Emily looked at her. "You did that on your own," Emily said. "Of course I did." Donna didn't look up from her chart. "You think I didn't know what was happening?" "I didn't know you were keeping records." "You didn't ask." Donna turned a page. "That's not the same as it not being done." Emily looked at her for a moment. This woman she'd been working alongside for 3 months, who had never once offered false warmth or unnecessary comfort, who had walked her to the elevator and said her name like it was a complete sentence. "Thank you," Emily said. Donna finally looked up. "Don't thank me. Just keep doing your job." She had not heard from Hale directly. He'd been placed on administrative leave pending the medical board review, a different administrative leave than hers, with different weight behind it. She saw him once, at a distance, in the parking lot 11 days after she returned. He was walking toward his car in civilian clothes, and he moved with the particular gait of a person carrying something heavy that wasn't in his hands. He didn't see her. Or if he did, he didn't stop. She stood at the window for a moment after he'd gone, and she thought about the night of the activation. His voice in the physician workroom. "I watched you run that floor last night," the way it had sounded like something being said by a man trying to find his way back to his own conscience. She thought about the falsified complaint with his credentials in the co-signature field, timed for 7:40 p.m. after the lights were low. Both of those things were real. They belonged to the same person. That was the part that didn't resolve cleanly, and she stopped expecting it to. She went back to the nurse's station and finished her shift. What? The recognition, when it came, didn't arrive in the form she'd imagined. She hadn't, in truth, imagined it much. She was not constitutionally oriented toward imagining her own vindication, which was probably a personality deficiency, and also probably one of the reasons she'd survived this intact. It came first in a letter from the Department of Defense, formally acknowledging her role in the North Vale activation and entering a commendation into the federal record. Clinical competence under pressure, integration of civilian and military medical response, sustained professionalism in adverse circumstances. The language was the language of official documents, precise, impersonal, and behind the precision, genuine. Commander Oakes sent her a separate note, handwritten, which surprised her. Short, "I've worked with a lot of people under pressure. You're one of the better ones. Oakes." She put it in her kitchen drawer with her documentation notes, which she hadn't thrown away. She wasn't sure she ever would. The second recognition was more public and therefore more uncomfortable, and also more necessary. Carol Marsh called her in February, 2 months after the activation, and offered her a role that hadn't existed before. Director of Emergency Tactical Coordination, a newly created position at North Vale, responsible for developing and running trauma response training for the department's nursing and resident staff, with a formal partnership with the county's first responder network. Emily sat across from Marsh in what had been Greer's office, now reorganized with different furniture and a different energy, and looked at the offer sheet. "This wasn't in the budget 4 months ago," Emily said. "A lot of things weren't in the budget 4 months ago," Marsh said. "Things change." A pause. "The federal partnership that came out of the activation review. It comes with resources. Part of those resources are designated for this kind of program." She looked at Emily steadily. "And frankly, after what this hospital failed to do for you, this is also the right thing. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Emily looked at the offer sheet again. "I still want to work the floor," she said. "The position is clinical administrative. Floor time is built in." Marsh paused. "I'm not offering you a desk. I'm offering you a position where what you actually know gets used in more than one direction." She took the offer sheet home and read it 3 times over 2 days. She thought about what she'd been when she arrived at North Vale. The woman in the parking lot in the rain, taking a breath before a threshold, needing something real without it being what it used to be. She thought about what she'd been looking for, and whether she'd found it, and whether those were even the right questions anymore. She signed the offer letter on a Thursday evening at her kitchen table, in the same place where she'd made her documentation notes, where she'd received the threatening texts, where she'd sat at midnight finishing her incident report with steady hands. She scanned it, sent it, and closed her laptop. Well, the public recognition, the formal kind, the kind with an audience, happened in March. North Vale held a staff assembly for the first time in 4 years, mandatory for all departments, in the hospital's main conference space. It was, on its surface, a routine operational event, updates on protocols, departmental metrics, introduction of new programs. But everyone in the building understood what it actually was, and attendance was complete in the way that things with moral weight tend to draw attendance. Emily sat in the 3rd row because she'd arrived without calculating where to sit, which meant she was not in the front row performing humility and not in the back row performing indifference. She was just there, in the 3rd row, in clean scrubs, next to Obi, who had dressed for the occasion in a way he probably wouldn't admit to. Carol Marsh ran the assembly efficiently and professionally. The operational updates took 30 minutes. The new program announcements took 15. And then she said Emily's name, and Emily stood up. And this room in this hospital, where 11 weeks ago she'd stood at a nurse's station with a torn sleeve and 15 witnesses who said nothing, applauded. It wasn't a performance. That was the thing about it. There were no cameras beyond the hospital's own internal documentation. There was no media presence, no formal speech from Emily, no podium moment. Marsh read the federal commendation. She described the new position. She said, plainly, without excess, that this hospital had not handled its obligations correctly, and that what was being acknowledged today was both Emily's achievement and the hospital's commitment to doing better. That last part surprised Emily. Institutions didn't usually say that. They usually found language that acknowledged forward progress without acknowledging backward failures. That Marsh had said it directly, in a room full of staff who had watched the previous months unfold, meant something. Emily looked out at the room. She saw Donna, who gave her nothing. No smile, no nod, no visible emotion of any kind, which was absolutely a form of emotion. She saw Obi, who was failing entirely at not looking moved. She saw Dr. Kim, who she'd worked alongside for 3 months, and who had been, throughout everything, quietly and consistently decent. She saw faces she knew and faces she didn't, residents and nurses and technicians and the people who kept a building like this running at the level below the level anyone noticed. She thought about Marcus Webb, who she'd spoken to twice on the phone since his discharge. Brief calls, just checking in, the kind she made for patients she'd been involved with significantly and then didn't make forever because that wasn't what the relationship was. He was recovering. He was, his father had said, ornery and eating too much. That was enough. She thought about the 16-year-old girl from the convenience store, whose name she'd finally gotten from the follow-up records, Jasmine Okafor. She'd been discharged in good condition. Emily had written her a note. Nothing elaborate, just a single paragraph, because she didn't know the girl and couldn't claim to, but she'd wanted to say something into the space the crisis had left. She didn't know if the note had arrived. She hoped it had. She thought about what she knew now that she hadn't known when she'd come here. She'd come to North Vale looking for something quieter. She'd found that quietness wasn't the same as safety, and safety wasn't the same as peace, and peace, real peace, the kind that had weight and texture and could hold pressure, was something you built through the long, imperfect, unglamorous work of staying true to what you knew was right, even when nobody was watching, especially when nobody was watching, in the moments when it cost you something. She had not been perfect through any of this. She'd been afraid in her apartment with a threatening photo on her phone. She'd felt something adjacent to satisfaction that she'd had to manage carefully. She'd been hurt by Hale in a way she was still processing and might be processing for a while. She'd made clinical mistakes on the night of the activation that she'd corrected but hadn't forgotten. That was the human version of this story, the one where the person who prevails isn't unmarked by the thing they survived. She accepted the applause without bitterness and without a performance of modesty either. She just let it be what it was, a room full of people saying you were right to stay, and she stood in the place where she'd once been told to leave, and she received it, imperfectly and completely. Kane's criminal trial was scheduled for October. She would be called as a witness. She was prepared for that, the way she was prepared for most things. Not with certainty about outcomes, but with clarity about her own part in them. In the months between March and October, she built the emergency tactical training program from the ground up. Not quickly, not smoothly, but with the iterative, honest effort of someone who understood that the best protocols came from the mistakes of the last crisis, not the imagined perfection of the next one. She worked with Oakes' team on integrating military-civilian response frameworks. She ran the first training cycle with 12 nurses and 3 residents in April, and it was imperfect and productive, and by the end of the second day, everyone in the room had learned something they didn't know before. She still worked the floor on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Bay 2 was still her home. One Thursday evening in June, Donna fell into step beside her as she was heading for the exit, which Donna never did. "You staying?" Donna asked. "What?" "At North Vale. Long term." Donna looked at her directly. "I'm asking because I want to know, not for any other reason." Emily thought about it honestly, the way Donna deserved. "Yeah," she said. "I think so." Donna nodded once. "Good." And then, completely without ceremony, she turned and went back to the station. Emily stood at the exit for a moment. The ER was in its evening rhythm behind her. The low-grade hum, the monitors, the sound of someone being moved quickly through the corridor, the particular quality of a place that absorbed whatever came through its doors and continued. It had done that every day for the 3 months she'd been here. It would do it tomorrow. She pushed through the door into the warm June evening. The parking lot was lit the same as it always was. The trees along the perimeter were full now, green and unremarkable. Somewhere in this city, a man who had walked through these same doors with his badge and his assumption of authority was waiting for a trial date. Somewhere, a doctor she'd once respected was in front of a medical board making an accounting of himself that she hadn't been able to make for him. Somewhere, a file clerk in the county records office was adding documents to a case that would outlast everyone's memory of the specific details, because institutions move that way. Long after the personal story ends, the paper record continues. She walked to her car. She didn't sit in it this time. Didn't need the breath, the threshold, the pause before a new beginning. She just got in, started the engine, and drove home through streets she'd learned over 7 months. The good route and the slow route, and the route she took when she needed the river on her left for 10 minutes before the turn. She took the river route tonight. The water moved alongside her in the late light, dark and indifferent, in the way rivers are, doing exactly what rivers do regardless of what's happening on the bank. She drove with the window down. The air smelled like something coming, some seasonal turn that hadn't arrived yet but was building. She thought about nothing specific and everything at once, which is the mental state that follows the end of something hard. Not emptiness, but a kind of open attention, the mind reorganizing around the absence of a thread it had been carrying so long it had forgotten the weight. Here's what she knew. She had not won because she was exceptional. She had survived because she was disciplined, and the difference between those two things mattered. Exceptional people got written about. Disciplined people stayed in the room. She had not been protected by some higher mechanism of justice sorting itself out. She had been protected by paper, by the obsessive, unglamorous practice of writing down what happened, who was there, what time it was, in a folder in her kitchen drawer at 11 p.m. when no one was watching, and the alternative was easier. Documentation wasn't heroic, but it was, in the end, what had made the difference. She had been afraid. She had been tired. She had swallowed things she should have been able to say out loud and kept moving because the situation didn't allow her the luxury of stopping. That was not strength. That was necessity. And the fact that it looked like strength from the outside didn't change what it felt like from the inside. And she would not perform a version of this story where she was never scared of the man in her parking lot or never felt the specific loneliness of being in a building full of people who watched and said nothing. The real story was that she'd been scared and done it anyway, tired and done it anyway, uncertain about outcomes and stayed in the room anyway. That was the only version worth telling. She turned off the river road and headed home. Behind her, the water kept moving in the dark, toward whatever it was moving toward, the way it always had.